All right, we've learned about bacteria, the first domain. Now we're going to learn about another prokaryote called Archaea. They're much lesser well known, but they're just as much a part of life here on Earth as bacteria. So the second domain is about Archaea. So where are they? If you don't know Spanish, Donde, esta, that means where is. I'm pretty sure. Where is the Archaea in the world? Because not a lot of people have heard about them. They tend to live in the harshest environments that exist for life. If you think of, okay, there's no way anything can actually live in that kind of environment, Archaea probably live there. They're pretty indestructible. They're pretty incredible. So like hydrothermal vents, extremely hot springs due to volcanic activity from beneath the Earth's crust. Some can live there. Some can live under the water, out of the water. Some can love salt so much they can live in the Dead Sea and other places where the salt content in the water makes it so dense that just a person can just float in the water, read their newspaper, and just have a good time in the salty, dense water. You wouldn't think things can live there. Archaea can. So that's kind of a brief look at Archaea. Here's how it looks on our phylogenetic tree. So when scientists use genetics and they use physical characteristics to try to determine relationships over time, Archaea is listed right here. We've talked about the many various kinds of bacteria earlier. This is another offshoot from the earliest forms of life, and Archaea are here in red. You'll notice that I want to point out that both bacteria and Archaea are prokaryotes. When I say that, I mean they don't have a nucleus, and they are single-celled organisms. So they're made of one cell, and those cells don't have a nucleus. Everything with a nucleus is included in that third domain of eukaryotes, which we will later split up into its various kingdoms. So Archaea, single-celled prokaryotic organisms that are different than bacteria, yet they're very similar to bacteria too. For one, they have many shapes. The bacilli, the cocci, and the spirali are included also in the Archaea domain. Some of these organisms, or all of them, are single-celled. All of them do not have a nucleus, and they don't have membrane-bound organelles like endoplasmic reticulum or mitochondria and lysosomes and stuff like that. So in those respects, Archaea is very similar to bacteria. But there are some distinct changes that make it its own domain that does not fit the other prokaryotic domain of bacteria. And here they are. For one, their cell membranes are more rugged. If you look at the molecular structure of the cell membrane, it acts differently than does bacteria's cell domain or cell membrane. The cell wall is also different. Remember how antibiotics can kill bacteria by rupturing the membrane that's made of peptidoglycan? Well, the cell wall of Archaea organisms do not have that peptidoglycan. Therefore, antibiotics would not work against Archaea organisms and species. The last difference would be that the ribosomes are slightly different than bacteria's ribosomes, and they actually are very, very similar to eukaryotes. So all of the multicellular organisms and unicellular organisms that will later be classified as eukaryotes, meaning they have a nucleus, their ribosomes are actually very similar to what we see in Archaea. Alright, how do they make a living? How do they get their energy? Most of them are chemotrophs, kind of like animals. They can break down chemical components in their environment. They get food and break it down for energy. So they're chemotrophic. Some, though, are phototrophic. They can make their own food with use of sunlight energy, just like some bacteria can, and plants do this too. Yeah, one example here is kind of this red tide. It colored all of the water that actually has a very high salt content as well. Colored all this water red because of an organism that is an archaic, or I shouldn't say that, it's a form of Archaea, and it belongs in that domain. There's different kinds of red tides. There was one red tide when we lived in Florida, made by red algae, that there was so much red algae in that part of the ocean at that time of year that other organisms just couldn't get the food they needed to survive. So like fish would wash up to shore, and it smelled gross. It was kind of a terrible environmental thing to have happen. But these red tides come in and really kill everything else that's there. I don't know if there's anything to kill off in this really salty water, but Archaea can be very abundant in some of the strangest places in the world. We talked about bacteria being mutualistic or parasitic. One good thing is they can form mutualistic relationships with other organisms. One example is in the stomachs of termites. There are unicellular organisms that belong to the Archaea domain that live in the stomachs of termites and help them digest wood. They're pretty tough little organisms there. But yeah, they can have mutualistic relationships, and so far we haven't discovered any that are parasitic. That's a really good thing because they seem to be tough to kill. So none of these are parasitic to other organisms so far as we can tell. They reproduce similar to how bacteria reproduce. Some of them will actually use fragmentation as a way, like a piece of that organism will, or that cell will be broken off and then regenerate the essential things that it needs to survive. And then others, most of them will reproduce by binary fission, where you have two identical daughter cells that are identical to the original, the parent. So, and we talked about that last time. All right. Like I said, they live in some of the craziest places that you would think anything could live. And there's names for these. Halophiles, literally that means salt-loving. Halite is the mineral made of NaCl, or sodium chloride. That's salt. So some of these organisms love an environment rich in salt, like the Dead Sea, the Great Salt Lake, and other very salty bodies of water. So those are halophiles. Thermophiles, if this means love and thermo means heat, these are heat-loving organisms. So they can live in the hottest, like almost boiling water. These types of Archaea can live, thermophiles that is. And then methanogens, those can live in environments that are that have high content of methane gas, like think cows' stomachs. Wouldn't smell great in there, but Archaea are like, hey, I don't care. Big deal. Can get through this. So yeah, strange stuff. So that is the second domain of prokaryotic organisms. That is Archaea.